Is John Moriarty, if you don't know me, and today I'm joined by Audrey Griffin, and Audrey is the author of this book called Hey Ireland, Israel's on the Line. So this is a very recent release. It's only been released in the last few weeks, and we're proud to stock it at Teach Solas. Hello Audrey, how are you doing?
I'm grand, John. How are you?
Very good, very good. You're with us from Kerry, is that right? You're in Kerry at the moment.
That's it, John. Yeah. It's quite wild and windy down here, but nothing new.
That's it. Nothing new for Kerry, is right. So Audrey, so we're looking at your book today, Hey Ireland, Israel's on the Line. So maybe if you can give our viewers and listeners maybe just a bit of a background on yourself and how are you connected, I guess, on the subject of Israel. How did this book come about in the first place?
Sure. Okay, well, I come from a Catholic background. And then I suppose as a young adult, I dedicated my life to the Lord. And from a very early stage, the Lord put missions on my heart. And so the very first mission he brought me on was in Lebanon in 2003. So he brought me there for a few months, and I was working in an orphanage, a home for children. And really, it was an amazing experience. And I have a real heart, actually, because of that, for the Arab world and the Muslim world, you know. But yes, then 2 years later, I got inspired again by the Lord to go to Israel. So this was a first. It was unexpected and really an eye-opening trip. If you could call it a trip. I lived there for, between 2005 and 2006, and I went back again for a few months in 2007. But it was wonderful, a great experience. And it was really, I suppose, that was the start of my journey with Israel, let's just say. But it actually wasn't until a few years later in 2011 that when I was in Siberia, actually, I was over there for a few months. And the Lord showed me clearly to write this book for the people of Ireland about Israel, to help people to understand really what's going on in Israel. There's a huge amount of hearsay out there. There's a lot of misinformation, and a lot of people are misguided. And so this was just, as soon as, I, as I say, got inspired by the Lord to write this, it seemed to make total sense. And so, yeah, that was 10 years ago. So there began my research. Even though I'd already read some books before then, I really, delved deep into the research and writing, of course, and then keeping up to date with current affairs, because as we know, Israel's in the news quite a lot. So so that's really how I came to write the book.
Okay, yeah, Israel is definitely in the news. It is a hot topic and a topic that can divide Christians. So this is why, it's good to talk about these issues and have dialogue with people. And before you went to Israel, did you have some preconceived notions about the state of Israel, about the politics, about the people? Did you have any things maybe from your past that you felt changed during your journey in Israel?
To be honest, I didn't have any preconceived notions. I was actually quite ignorant, as I have to say. I didn't know much about Israel. All I knew was that the Lord was clearly laying that country on my heart, and he was telling me to go. So did I have any major revelations there? No, but I remember very early on in my trip actually I did have, but I'll get back to that in a minute. Very early on in my trip, I was walking down in the direction of the Temple Mount, not knowing even what it was. I was walking down these steps, and beyond it, of course, there's the Mount of Olives, just behind the Temple Mount. And in my spirit, there was an excitement about seeing not the Temple Mount actually so much, but it was the Mount of Olives. So that was one thing that I found quite interesting. And the people that I was with at the time found that quite interesting, because they knew the place, they'd been living there, and they said, oh, funny that your spirit is excited, because that's the place where Jesus left the earth and that's where he's going to return one day. So, but did I get a revelation? Actually, yes. Yes, I did. A revelation did come to me while I was there. I was about 10 months, about 8 months in the land at the time, when somebody said to me that, oh, all these other, tourists, I happened to be a student over there, to be honest, actually in Jerusalem. And the dean of students said, oh, so I suppose you're like the other students here, you just want to settle in Israel, get married here and, live in Israel for the rest of your life. And I was like, no, I don't mind. My heart is for the nations. I'm happy to go wherever the Lord sends me. And but it did kind of prompt a question in me that, really it was like, okay, Lord, if there's something that I'm not seeing here, if there's something I'm missing, if there's something about Israel that I'm not yet catching, even though I didn't have an issue with Israel, certainly not. I said, will you give me your heart for the people and for the land of Israel? And I thought this was the safest thing to do, to ask the Lord, because these other people I knew, they seemed lovely and everything, and they were lovely, but I didn't know them that long. Whereas I'd known the Lord since I was a child, and I knew that I could trust God. And all I can say is that 2 weeks later, about that, I was walking down Jaffa Street, the main street that links the modern city of Jerusalem to the old city. And I had done this umpteen times. I mean, I was always out walking the streets of Jerusalem. I rarely ever took the bus. I was, nearly every day, if not every day. And so anyway, on this particular day, for the umpteenth time, I'm walking down in the direction of the Temple Mount. And there are all these Jewish people coming towards me from the wall. Not a new experience, something quite normal. Maybe it was the Sabbath, I don't know, the religious day of the week. Yeah. And so with all these religious Jews were walking towards me in black garb, and they're, very severe. They were, they're pale, actually, these particular Jewish people, and the Orthodox religious Jews, and, and daddy and mommy and all the children and the buggy, and, they're all coming towards me. They're in their droves. And although I'd seen this so many times before, and I'd walked past them so many times before, all of a sudden, I felt the love of God in my heart for his people, the people that he calls my people in the Bible, my people who are called by my name, he says, So that really was a revelation. From that moment on, back in 2006, I had a heart for the Jewish people that, has not gone away, thank God, and for the land of Israel as well.
Okay. And this book, Hey Ireland, Israel's on the Line, is this specifically to Irish people this book is for, or who do you feel would read this book and would get a lot from it?
Absolutely, it's for Irish people. I mean, in fact, it's a book for everybody in all nations.
Yeah.
But the Lord specifically called me to write it for the people of Ireland. Now, why he might ask me to write it for the people of Ireland, I think is becoming very, very evident, even in recent days, as a report on anti-Semitism in Ireland just came out there in the last couple of weeks. A comprehensive 200-page report that really exposes the darkness of an anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic kind of rhetoric and talk that's going on out there, and activity. So Ireland absolutely needs to hear this message, and so now it has become very clear why the Lord pointed out Ireland in particular. There was a broadsheet article in 2011, and the headline of that article was something like, "Is Ireland the most anti-Semitic country in Europe?"
Wow.
That's quite a shocking kind of statement. And the article, John, went on to prove that it seemed that Ireland really very well may be the most anti-Semitic country in Europe. And in recent times, the question has gone even, it's even worse than that, because we're asking now, is Ireland the most anti-Semitic country in the West? And the most anti-Jewish, for anybody who doesn't understand anti-Semitism, it's anti-Jewish. It's that anti-Jewish hatred that has gone on since, for thousands of years. So yeah, Ireland, appears to be very hostile, of course. And they're not the only people who would be very hostile towards Israel, but some very strong Republicans, certainly, and even some Sinn Féiners have shown up in the report on anti-Semitism in Ireland. And again, they're not the only ones, but there seem to be quite a lot of voices from the Republicans, and to some degree, you can kind of understand why they might begin to think that way, because they see the Palestinians as the underdog.
Yeah.
And the Palestinian people are suffering. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And it's shocking and it's absolutely terrible. Okay. But they also see the Israelis as the perpetrators of that suffering, the aggressive occupiers. And the truth of the matter is very far from that. And basically, that's what this book is bringing into the light. It's bringing, that clearer perspective, sorry, I don't know if you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, no, can you talk a bit more about it? I guess we could go into the different parts of the book. It's kind of broken up into 3 main sections, and maybe tell us, is it just a book looking at the Bible? Is it just looking at theology and the Israeli people, or is there more? Is there history and geography involved in it as well, and politics?
Well, there's actually quite a bit involved in this book, and the research from those 10 years was, delving into politics, history, geography, and religion, of course. I mean, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and I believe what God said about the Jewish people from the very beginning of the Bible, the promises that he made to them from Genesis chapter 12, so 12 chapters into the Bible, to the very last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. And there's promises, for the people of Israel. There's promises that he's not going to leave them or forsake them, that he has engraved them on the palm of his hand, that he has loved them with an everlasting love. And he's a God who doesn't lie. So yeah, that first part of the book actually goes into the more religious side of it, I suppose, and the historical. Okay, so you've got the biblical foundations in the first part, and the historical side of things, like, where did this guy Abraham come from? Hey, who was Abraham? Oh, right, okay, he's the father of the Jewish nation, okay? And then, his sons and the story and how it all unfolded, and how God came to that place of making such amazing promises to a people that really, were quite despised, he said, he says, I didn't love you because you were such a great people, he says in the word of God, and I think it's Deuteronomy, is it chapter 7, where he says, it's not because you were loved or you're anything great that I actually chose you, it's actually because of my love, because I loved you. God has a heart for those who suffer, and he has a heart for the Palestinians. And so the other 2 parts look at the geography, the history, and the politics of the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, and Israel. So just as we consider the geography of Israel, like most people really haven't got a notion of how absolutely tiny the land of Israel is. It's a sliver of a land, that's roughly the size of Munster, and only 9 miles wide, even at a certain part.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So it's tiny. So the land that the Jewish people were, let's say, bequeathed by the United Nations, is a lot smaller than a lot of people would think. But just thinking back upon, when I say that about the United Nations, that was 1947. 1947 was when the UN General Assembly voted to give a land to the Jewish people alongside land for the Palestinian people. So back in 1947 was the very first mention and offer of a 2-state solution. And amazingly, the vote, came in favor of that Jewish state and of the one alongside Palestine at the time. But the Jewish people accepted it. They were absolutely delighted. They were not long after coming out of the ashes of the Holocaust, I mean, this was think the end of World War II, 1945. This was 1947. And they're being offered this now. And it was actually the Arabs that went berserk. They were the ones who went berserk over this. They did not want the Jews to have any land. And so they could have had a two-state solution from way back then. But look, that's part of the politics here and part of the history that people really don't know about. There's lots of other history, like the history of how the Jewish people have been treated, even by the church throughout the ages, that from way back from 100 AD, from the early church fathers, some skewed kind of thinking started to come in about the Jewish people, and there were these ideas of beginning to call them the Christ killers, and and all of that, of course, influenced the Crusaders and other people later on, and all kinds of persecution and pogroms, violent riots that the Jewish people endured in Europe, the Inquisition, all kinds of stuff that they endured throughout the centuries. So other things in the book. I mean, I look at, of course, the wars, some significant wars in recent history, and since the modern state of Israel was birthed in 1948. And I take a look at, really, say, for example, what some world generals have to say, and even what an IDF general himself, is he a general? Now, let me get that information right. He's an IDF major, sorry, Al-Wahib. Should I stop there? Sorry.
No, that's okay. You've explained it very well. And it kind of basically, this book, I guess, would you say, Audrey, that it gives Christians and even non-Christians just a good overview, and to get a good basis if maybe many people are ignorant, or we watch the news and we get one point of Israel and what's going on there, but this can kind of give you a whole understanding and whole overview of things. And I believe as well you have all your different points that you make, that you have the sources of them, so people can go into further study as well through reading this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's the tagline as well, which might be a bit controversial. Are we prepared for a potential Holocaust? Could you maybe comment on that, Audrey? What you think about that tagline?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, this might sound very out there, very dramatic. What's a Holocaust? It's mass destruction. The last Holocaust that the world has experienced was when 6 million Jews were eliminated, were murdered by the Nazis. So during World War II. A potential Holocaust. Okay, all you need to think of, there are a number of potential perpetrators of a potential Holocaust.
Yeah.
Okay, but if we were to take the most serious of them, it probably would be Iran, the Iranian regime. Iran is run by, the government is it's a theocracy. So that means that basically a religious leader rules the country in the name of God, which can be a very dangerous thing, because how do we know exactly what God is saying, and especially if it's not coming from the Bible?
Yeah.
But so the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is the supreme religious leader, the supreme leader of Iran, and he has come out with some very troubling statements about Israel, and he calls Israel the cancerous tumor of the Middle East that needs to be removed. The previous president, Ahmadinejad, so not the current, but the previous one, was very clear as well, and very, he came out with some very rabid anti-Semitic kind of rhetoric. But also the current president of the Iranian regime, Rouhani, he's supposed to be moderate, but sometimes, the facade, kind of, I don't know, the mask is removed and he comes out of his box, and you get to really see. If you look at his resume, for example, his roots are in terrorism, okay? Yeah. But also, if you look at, recently there, when he got a bit annoyed at sanctions that were coming in because of their Iran, the nuclear, the stuff they weren't supposed to be up to, and the nations were sanctioning them. When he got a bit annoyed and a bit kind of hot under the collar at one point, he actually said the same thing, in so many words, about it basically being the tumor of the Middle East that needs to be removed. So we're talking about a country here also who hates America, hates democracy, hates Israel, wants to remove Israel, and is seeking hard after being nuclear capable. Okay. And here we have the nations in 2015 signing a nuclear deal with this crazy Iranian regime who, make no qualms about their intentions to wipe out Israel and to remove democracy actually from the world. If I were just to read a couple of quotes here, our duty, here's a quote, our duty is to prepare the way for an Islamic world government. These are the words of the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Okay. Now, I've got a number of people's testimonies in this book, and I've got a number of Arabs and Palestinian testimonies who actually are pro-Israel. And there's this one guy who was a former Muslim terrorist, Kamal Salim, and he says that this should worry us. We should really take note of this, pay attention, sit up. He says every Muslim must commit jihad, holy war. It's the sixth pillar of Islam. It's the invisible pillar that nobody talks about except the Iranians. So, we've got, to really question, the fact that Western powers, headed by America at the time, by Barack Obama, signed a deal with these people who make no qualms about their intentions. They're not just wanting to wipe out Israel. They're looking to wipe out democracy, and they want a caliphate. They want to sit on the government of the whole world. That's what they say. Even just, a year after, not even a year after that nuclear deal, that crazy nuclear deal was signed with them back in 2015. The following year, in 2016, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, said, the future is missiles, not negotiations.
Wow, that's pretty shocking statements coming there.
It is.
And it should make us all sit up and listen and look at what's happening in the Middle East and look at what's happening in Israel. Because, if we look at our Bibles, Israel is key, whatever side you're on, and there's a reason Israel is constantly in the news. So we have to wake up and see what is happening here and educate ourselves, whichever side people are on. And I know it can be a division within the Christian church, and just, as Christians, we're supposed to follow knowledge and truth and educate ourselves. So for anyone that would like to learn more how Ireland and Israel are connected, and as Irish Christians, we should be focusing on this situation, I'd recommend this book, Hey Ireland, Israel's on the Line, by Audrey Griffin. And before we go, Audrey, is there any maybe other Christian books that you've read in the past that you would want to share with other people? Anything that you would recommend to other Christians?
Sure, yeah. I'm thinking of a book that impacted me very much, Brother Young's The Heavenly Man. So The Heavenly Man by Brother Young. That's going back now a few years now. I think that was written maybe back in 2000 or something along those lines. But I found it impactful. Okay, what's it about? I'll just say very briefly, I suppose, for people. It's about this Chinese boy in communist China, growing up in communist China out in a village, and he comes to a knowledge of Jesus Christ as being his Lord and Savior. He comes to believe in the Christian God. I think it happened quite miraculously, but it's a while since I've read it. But what really impacted me about the book was the fact that it was like a modern day Book of Acts.
Wow.
This guy experienced persecution, and he experienced miracles that, were experienced also in the Book of Acts. And as I say, it inspired me. And it was the book I was reading, was one of 4 books that I was reading before the Lord showed me to go to Lebanon. And so I believe that was instrumental, really, in me stepping out of the boat and just, and taking that step of faith at the time. So it's been very impactful.
That's great to hear. It's good to read Christian books, and it can really encourage us. One book that was on my mind when you were talking is a book called Captive in Iran, when you were mentioning Iran, because as Christians, we have to be careful. We are focusing on a lot of it is regimes, not the people themselves. And thankfully,
Absolutely.
the Christian church is exploding in Iran.
Yeah.
And Captive in Iran is about 2 female Christians who are evangelizing and what they went through as well. So there's so many stories from all these regimes, whether, you know, you go into China, North Korea, Iran, that people are coming to the Lord. And as you said yourself, people of an Arabic background from Palestine as well, that they are coming to the Lord. And you know, we have to evangelize to these people as well, whatever their background is. And God is there. He's the God of miracles, that whether they're a terrorist or not, you know, that people
Yes.
can be saved through this. Yeah.
Yeah. And like that, as I say, there are a number of those testimonies in the book of people who actually were terrorists and now say, that's crazy, that, you know, we shouldn't be getting rid of, we should be actually supporting the nation of Israel. They're not, you know, colonialists. They're not, you know, they're not these apartheid, aggressive, you know, it's not that kind. It's not a regime. The state of Israel and the people of Israel just want peace. They just want to get on with life. They're sick and tired of the terror, you know. But absolutely, the Palestinian people are suffering. The Iranian people are suffering underneath these regimes.
Yes.
And actually, it's good you mentioned that, because I wanted to come back to that, John, that, you know, I said that it wasn't earlier on in this interview, I was saying that it's not, you know, it's not the Israeli government or the Israeli people who are the perpetrators of the suffering. And there's so much evidence in the book to show that they actually are the ones, and even according to one of these Palestinians himself, would say that they help the Palestinian people more than anyone else.
Wow.
They help the Palestinian people, and there's so much evidence of that. But so who are the culprits? And that's what this book also looks at, you know, and it's really important. It's really important because we're being deceived by the ones who are misleading and misguiding the world down this dangerous trek. So yeah, I mean, and who they are, will I give it away, or
we'll let people buy the book and find out for
okay?
themselves. We have to leave it on a bit of suspense.
Brilliant, John.
So just I want to thank you very much, and for anyone, again, this is Hey Ireland, Israel's on the line. I'll put the link below on the interview. And where can we find out more? I think you have your own website as well, Audrey.
I do indeed. It's www.israelontheline.ie.
Very good.
And so you'll be able to, find where you can buy the books like Teach Solas, and just read a bit more about the background of it and that. So.
And any ideas for any follow-up books in the future, or?
No.
This is the
no plans.
You got this out.
I had no plans to write this book.
You know,
this kind of came out of the blue. But hey, you know, it was the right thing to do, because actually it was the right thing to do because, you know, if you think of the Irish politician Edmund Burke from the 18th century, yes. I just read a quote actually of his: "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." Now it's time for the good men to start doing something. You know, that there's, you know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you know, from World War II. He was a theologian, a German theologian, and he wasn't for, you know, he was against the Nazi regime. Yeah. And he lost his life. He was assassinated eventually by the Nazis. But one of the things he says, and it's a very famous quote, but it's really good to remind ourselves, is silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to speak. God will not hold us guiltless, actually, he said. Then he says, not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.
Well, very apt for our times. There's a lot of evil going around in the world today from many different areas. But as Christians, we have to believe and have hope, you know, that we will one day see it all come to peace, and there'll be a new earth, a new heavens and new earth that we are all looking forward to. So I just, on that note, Audrey, I'd just like to thank you again for this this interview, and all the best with the book. And if you do ever release another title, let us know about that. Okay, Audrey?
I will, John. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for watching. Leave a comment below, whether you agree or disagree with Audrey. It's always good to have a bit of back and forth. And if you want to read the book and find out more, you'll find the link below as well.